What happens when a nation forgets its promises? It is a question that hangs in the air of every quiet town and screams in the silence of every forgotten life. It is a question written on the faces of the old, the tired, the ones who gave everything and were handed back nothing but the cold, hard arithmetic of a world that had moved on. The cold, hard truth of America is often found not in the halls of power, but under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of a VA clinic waiting room, a place where time itself seems to have surrendered. In this story, a nation's broken promise is embodied by one old Marine, a man whose quiet dignity is his last line of defense against a world determined to erase him. His name was Arthur Jensen, and he was a ghost long before he was dead. When they shoved him, a forgotten hero, out of line, they awakened something they could not possibly understand. They did not know that in the shadows, a different kind of soldier was watching, a man for whom the war had never ended. And when four generals saw the faded patch on Arthur's worn jacket, a patch that spoke of fire and ice and a forgotten kind of courage, they saluted. In that moment, a debt was called due. This is the story of that reckoning. It is a story of how the protective fury of one broken knight, the unwavering loyalty of his K9 partner, and the forgotten honor of a ghost from the past brought a corrupt empire to its knees. Because some promises, no matter how deeply buried, can never truly be broken. Arthur Jensen knew the cold. It was not the bracing, clean cold of a Korean winter on watch, a cold that sharpened the senses and made the stars seem like chips of ice in a black velvet sky. It was not the wet, clinging cold of a jungle monsoon in Vietnam, a cold that seeped into your bones but was fought back by the simmering heat of adrenaline and the proximity of your brothers. No, this was a different kind of cold. A cheap cold. A thin, mean cold that lived in the rattling panes of his single-room apartment window and bred in the thin spots of his threadbare blanket. It was the cold of poverty, of being 82 years old and utterly, profoundly alone. It was the cold of a nation's indifference. Each morning, Arthur's battle was not against an enemy he could see, but against the simple, brutal physics of his own body. His knees, once strong enough to carry a 70-pound pack through the frozen mud of the Chosin Reservoir, now screamed in protest at the mere suggestion of standing. They were filled with the ground glass of 82 years of gravity and 2 wars' worth of abuse. His hands, which had once expertly field-stripped a rifle in the dark, now trembled so violently that buttoning his shirt was a 10-minute strategic operation. His world had shrunk to the size of this room, a 10 by 12-foot box smelling of old paper, dust, and the faint, lingering scent of the liniment he rubbed on his joints. The walls were a faded, water-stained yellow. His furniture was a collection of ghosts, a lumpy armchair where his beloved Eleanor used to sit, a small table with a single, chipped photograph of her, and a narrow bed that felt as wide and empty as a desert. On a small, dusty shelf sat the only testaments to the man he had been. A folded flag in a triangular wooden case. A handful of medals, a silver star, 2 purple hearts, and others he could no longer name, tarnished and forgotten in a small velvet box. And hanging on a hook, his old dress uniform, the deep forest green of the Marine Corps, a silent rebuke to the grey, washed-out world he now inhabited. But the most important artifact was not on the shelf. It was sewn onto the breast of the worn, olive-drab field jacket he wore every day. It was a small, circular patch, its colors faded by sun and time. A stylized image of a griffin, its wings spread, its claws clutching a spyglass. Above it, the arched letters, VMO, 6, below, the unit's unofficial, whispered name, the Ghost Griffins. They had been the eyes of the 1st Marine Division. Men who went forward, alone or in pairs, to places where entire battalions were afraid to tread. They were observers, calling in fire, living off the land and their wits for weeks at a time. They were ghosts, slipping through enemy lines, their passing marked only by the devastating, accurate artillery that followed in their wake. In Korea, they were the phantoms of the frozen hills. In Vietnam, the specters of the jungle. Arthur was one of the last. He ran a trembling hand over the patch. The threads were worn smooth. He remembered the feel of the needle as his mother had sewn it on his first jacket, the pride in her eyes. He remembered the blood that had stained it, the mud that had caked it, the rain that had washed it. It was more than a piece of cloth. It was his history. It was his honor. Today was VA Day. A day he dreaded. It meant a two-bus journey, a long, humiliating wait, and the inevitable prodding and poking by a young doctor whose grandfather had not yet been born when Arthur first took a bullet for his country. But the pain in his chest had been getting worse, a tight, squeezing vice that came and went, and the pills were running low. He had no choice. He pulled on the jacket, the familiar weight a small comfort. He checked his wallet. $7 and change. Enough for the bus, but not for lunch. He would have to be quick. He looked at Eleanor's picture, her smile a beacon from a warmer, kinder time. "Wish me luck, Ellie," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. The door clicked shut behind him, and Arthur Jensen, a hero of 2 wars, a ghost griffin, stepped out to face the cheap, mean cold of his world. Miles away, in a different kind of cold, another soldier was waging a different kind of war. The cold here was clean, sharp, and honest. It was the pre-dawn chill of the Rocky Mountains, a wilderness that cared nothing for medals or memories. It was a cold that Jack Cutter welcomed. It was real. Jack was a man built of hard lines and sharp angles, as if carved from the mountain granite itself. He stood 6'3", a solid 240 pounds of dense, functional muscle forged in the unforgiving crucible of Marine Force recon. His face was a roadmap of a hard life, all jutting jaw and a nose that had been broken more than once. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing. They were the eyes of a hunter. The eyes of a man who had seen the abyss and had not blinked. His war was internal. A war against the ghosts that followed him home from the dust-choked plains of Afghanistan. Ghosts with the faces of his fallen brothers. One ghost in particular. Leo. His spotter. His best friend. The man who had taken the bullet meant for him. The guilt was a living thing, a cold, heavy weight that sat permanently in his chest. He had tried to outrun it, moving to this isolated cabin deep in the Colorado wilderness, seeking a silence that never came. The silence of the mountains was always broken by the echoes of the past, the crack of a rifle, the scream of a friend, the sickening thud of a life extinguished. His only anchor to the present, the only thing that kept the ghosts at bay, was Havoc. Havoc was a massive German shepherd, 95 pounds of black and tan muscle, intelligence, and controlled aggression. Like Jack, he was a veteran. A former multipurpose canine, or MPC, who had served 2 tours sniffing out IEDs in the Helmand province. A jagged scar ran from his left eye down his muzzle, a permanent reminder of the bomb he had found moments too late, a bomb that had taken the life of his handler and peppered his own body with shrapnel. They were 2 broken soldiers, finding solace in each other's silent, damaged company. They understood each other in a way the civilian world never could. They both bore the invisible and visible scars of war. They both woke from nightmares with silent screams caught in their throats. Their morning ritual was a war of attrition against the mountain. Jack, stripped to the waist despite the freezing air, would chop wood, the rhythmic thud of the axe a form of meditation. Each swing was a blow against the chaos in his mind. Each split log was a small, tangible victory. Havoc would sit nearby, perfectly still, his intelligent eyes tracking Jack's every move, a silent, watchful sentinel. His presence was a low, steady hum of reassurance. He was on watch. Jack was safe. After the wood was chopped, they would run. They didn't jog. They moved through the dense forest with a predatory grace, a man and a dog flowing over the terrain as one. It was not for fitness. It was for control. Pushing his body to its absolute limit was the only way Jack could quiet the noise in his head. The burning in his lungs, the ache in his muscles, it was a pain he could understand, a pain he could master. But today, the ritual was broken. A red light blinked on the satellite phone, a device he kept only for emergencies and for one specific contact. He finished his run, his body steaming in the cold air, and went inside the Spartan cabin. The interior was as disciplined as a barracks room, a bed with a perfectly folded wool blanket, a small wood stove, a table, and a wall of books on tactics, history, and engineering. No photos. No decorations. No clutter. He picked up the phone. The message was from his old team leader, now a 4-star general working in the Pentagon. It was brief, a polite but firm, request for him to attend a Veterans Outreach event at the Denver VA Medical Center. It was a high-profile event, with several senior officers present, meant to show the military's commitment to its aging warriors. Jack hated these things. The handshakes, the forced smiles, the politicians using veterans as props. He was about to delete the message when a second line caught his eye. It was a personal note from the general. "Cutter, I know you're out in the wilderness taming grizzlies, but we need some real heroes there. Not the kind in suits. Show these old-timers they are not forgotten." Jack grunted. Real heroes, the words tasted like ash in his mouth. The real heroes were all dead. He looked at Havoc, who had rested his massive head on Jack's knee, his amber eyes full of a deep, knowing sadness. The dog whined, a low, soft sound. He could always sense Jack's turmoil. Jack sighed, the sound loud in the quiet cabin. He didn't want to go. He wanted to stay here, in his fortress of solitude, where the only demons he had to fight were his own. But the general's words had struck a nerve. Show these old-timers they are not forgotten. It was the echo of a promise he had made to Leo, lying in the dust, the life bleeding out of him. Look after the guys, Jack. Don't let them be forgotten. It was a mission. And Jack Cutter was a man who had never abandoned a mission. "All right, boy," he said, his voice rough. "Gear up. We're going to the city." Havoc's ears perked up. His tail gave a single, solid thump against the floor. The war was over, but the duty remained. For both of them. The Denver VA Medical Center was a monument to well-intentioned bureaucracy. A sprawling complex of beige buildings connected by sterile hallways, it hummed with a low-grade, institutional misery. The air was a cocktail of antiseptic, floor wax, and the faint, sweet smell of decay. For the men and women who came here, it was a place of last resort, a bureaucratic gauntlet to be run in search of a measure of peace, or at least, a bottle of pills to dull the pain. Arthur Jensen felt every one of his 82 years as he shuffled through the automatic doors. The sudden warmth of the building was a shock after the biting wind outside, and it made him feel dizzy. The lobby was a sea of grey heads, wheelchairs, and the blank, thousand-yard stares of men who had seen too much. The noise was a dull roar of conversations, television's blaring news channels, and the constant, disembodied voice of the automated appointment system. He took his place at the end of a long, snaking line for the pharmacy, his worn folder clutched in his trembling hands. The line was a cross-section of American military history. A young man with a prosthetic leg and a haunted look in his eyes, his t-shirt bearing the name of a fallen unit from Iraq. A group of Vietnam vets, their faded fatigues and long hair a testament to a different, equally brutal war. And then there were the men like Arthur, the relics of Korea and World War II, their bodies bent and gnarled by time, their numbers dwindling with each passing year. The line moved at a glacial pace. Arthur leaned against the wall, trying to take the weight off his screaming knees. He felt a familiar tightness in his chest and fumbled in his pocket for his nitro pills, realizing with a jolt of panic that the bottle was empty. That was why he was here. He had to make it to the window. He closed his eyes, trying to transport himself back to a quieter time, to the smell of Eleanor's baking, to the feel of her hand in his. But the present was too loud, too insistent. "Hey, old man, you gonna move or you gonna take a nap?" The voice was sharp, impatient. Arthur opened his eyes to see a man in his 50s, with a florid face and a cheap suit, trying to push past him. He wasn't a veteran, Arthur could tell. He had the soft, entitled look of a man who had never known a day of real hardship. "The line starts back there," Arthur said, his voice quiet but firm. "Yeah, well, I got places to be," the man sneered, gesturing with a thumb over his shoulder. "I'm not here to collect a government check. I'm on business." He saw the folder in Arthur's hand. "What's that? Your bingo card?" Before Arthur could respond, the man shoved. It wasn't a hard shove, but for a man of Arthur's age and frailty, it was enough. He stumbled backwards, his fragile balance gone. He pinwheeled his arms, a silent, desperate cry for help, but his body betrayed him. He hit the polished linoleum floor with a sickening thud. The folder flew from his grasp, scattering its contents across the floor. A sheaf of yellow papers, his service records, his honorable discharge, a commendation letter signed by a general long dead. And on top of them all, a single, crisp white envelope. An eviction notice. The scene seemed to freeze. The man in the suit just stood there, a look of annoyance on his face, as if Arthur had inconvenienced him by falling. A few people in line gasped, but no one moved. It was the paralysis of the herd, the unwillingness to get involved. And then, a new presence made itself known. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. It was not the sound of an animal. It was the sound of a weapon system being activated. Jack Cutter had been standing near the entrance, a silent observer, his own discomfort in the crowded space palpable. He had been scanning the room, his training kicking in, identifying exits, potential threats, and points of cover. He had seen Arthur, a small, frail figure in a sea of bodies, and something about the old man's quiet dignity had caught his attention. He had seen the man in the suit, his aggressive posture, his predatory aura. Jack had marked him as a potential problem. When the shove happened, Jack moved. He did not rush. He flowed through the crowd like water, a large, dark shape of purpose. Havoc, who had been sitting patiently at his side, was already in motion, his leash held tight in Jack's hand. The dog was in a perfect vanguard stance, body low, muscles coiled, teeth bared in a silent, terrifying display of controlled violence. He placed himself between Jack and the man in the suit, a living barrier. Jack didn't even look at the man who had pushed Arthur. His focus was entirely on the old man on the floor. He knelt, his large frame easily eclipsing Arthur's. "Sir," Jack's voice was a low baritone, surprisingly gentle. "Are you all right? Can you move?" Arthur blinked, his vision swimming. He saw a huge mountain of a man, his face grim, and beside him, the terrifying, beautiful head of a massive shepherd, its eyes fixed on the man in the suit with a look of cold, calculating fury. I think so," Arthur stammered, embarrassed and shaken. Jack's hands, large but surprisingly gentle, checked him for injuries, the movements quick, efficient, and professional. "No broken bones," Jack murmured, more to himself than to Arthur. He began gathering the scattered papers, his eyes flicking over them, taking in the details. Honorable discharge. Silver Star. And the eviction notice. His jaw tightened. It was then that the room's atmosphere shifted again. A wave of deference parted the crowd. For men, their uniforms crisp, their chests a rainbow of ribbons, their shoulders heavy with the weight of 4 stars, were walking toward the pharmacy. They were the senior officers Jack was supposed to meet, the reason he was here. They were on their way to the staged press event, a tour of the facility. Their senior aide, a young, eager-to-please captain, saw the commotion and hurried forward. "What's going on here? Clear a path. General Patton is coming through," he barked, his voice filled with self-importance. The head general, a tall, imposing man with a face like carved granite, waved him to silence with a flick of his hand. His eyes, like Jack's, missed nothing. He saw the old man on the floor, the larger man helping him, the snarling dog, and the terrified-looking civilian in the cheap suit. "What's the situation here, son?" the general asked, his voice calm but carrying the effortless authority of a man accustomed to command. His eyes fell on Jack. He recognized him instantly. "Cutter? What the hell are you doing on the floor?" "Assisting a fellow Marine, General," Jack replied, not taking his eyes off Arthur. The general's gaze shifted to Arthur, who was now being helped into a sitting position by Jack. He saw the faded, olive-drab jacket. And then he saw the patch. The general froze. He leaned in, his eyes narrowing. He stared at the patch for a long, silent moment. The image of the griffin. The faded letters, VMO, 6. A look of stunned, profound respect washed over his face. He straightened up, his back ramrod straight. He looked at the other 3 generals, who had now caught up and were looking on with curiosity. He pointed a single, decisive finger at the patch on Arthur's chest. Their reactions were instantaneous and identical. The casual posture of the tour vanished. Their faces hardened with a shared, almost sacred understanding. It was as if they had seen a ghost, a legend brought to life. Without a word, without a signal, the senior general snapped his heels together. His hand came up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it could have cut glass. "Attention," he barked, his voice echoing through the now silent lobby. The other three generals immediately followed suit, their hands snapping to their brows, their bodies rigid, their eyes fixed on the frail, confused old man sitting on the floor. For four-star generals, the highest echelons of the United States military, stood at rigid attention, saluting a destitute veteran on the linoleum floor of a VA clinic. The entire room held its breath. The nurses, the doctors, the waiting veterans, even the smarmy man in the suit, all of them stared, dumbfounded. They didn't understand what they were seeing, but they knew it was important. They knew they were witness to something ancient and powerful. Arthur looked up, bewildered. He saw the four salutes, the four pairs of eyes filled with a reverence he hadn't seen in 50 years. He looked down at his own jacket, at the faded patch. And for the first time in a long, long time, Arthur Jensen remembered who he was. He wasn't just an old man in a cold room. He was a ghost griffin. And that meant something. Jack Cutter watched the scene unfold, his face an unreadable mask. But inside, a cold, hard resolve was beginning to form. He had seen the eviction notice. He had seen the shame and fear in Arthur's eyes, now replaced by a flickering ember of pride. This was not just about a push in a line. This was about a war being waged against the forgotten, and Jack had just been drafted. The salute held for a long, charged moment. It was a gesture that transcended rank and time, a bridge across generations of warriors. It was the active duty, four-star leadership of the most powerful military on earth paying homage to the living history that sat before them. The senior general, a man named Marcus Thorne, no relation to the coming villain, a bitter irony of fate, finally lowered his hand, and the others followed suit. He knelt down, mirroring Jack, his knees creaking only slightly. The fabric of his multi-thousand-dollar dress uniform creased as it touched the grimy floor, an act of profound humility. "VMO 6, the general said, his voice now quiet, filled with awe. "The Ghost Griffins. Sir, I read your unit's after-action reports at the War College. They are required reading for every intelligence officer. Legendary stuff. We thought you were all gone." Arthur blinked, the words slowly penetrating the fog of his confusion and the lingering pain from the fall. "There aren't many of us left," he admitted, his voice raspy. "You're Arthur Jensen, aren't you?" Another general chimed in, a Marine aviator by his insignia. "You called in the fire mission that saved the 5th Marines at Keesang from your observation post on Hill 881 South. After your radio operator was hit. You stayed on, alone, for 3 days, wounded, directing artillery while the NVA tried to overrun your position." Arthur just nodded, the memory a ghost that still walked with him. He didn't see it as heroic. He saw it as his job. His duty. The man in the cheap suit, who had been frozen in a state of shock, now saw an opportunity. He puffed up his chest, attempting to regain some semblance of dignity. "See? I told you. This is a big misunderstanding. I'm just trying to conduct my business here, and this old..." He caught the look in Jack Cutter's eyes and the word died in his throat. Jack hadn't moved, but his entire presence had become a physical threat. He was a coiled spring, a predator that had identified its prey. His voice, when it came, was low and dangerous, a gravelly rumble that promised violence. "You shoved a Silver Star recipient to the floor," Jack stated, not as a question, but as a judgment. "Walk away now. Before I change my mind." The man's face paled. He looked from Jack's cold eyes to the four generals now staring at him with undisguised contempt. He looked at Havoc, who had not broken his stare, a low growl still emanating from his chest. The man's bluster evaporated, replaced by a primal fear. He stammered something incoherent, turned, and practically ran from the building, a gazelle that had narrowly escaped the lion. Jack paid him no more mind. He was already a ghost. The mission objective was in front of him. "Let's get you up, sir," Jack said, his tone shifting back to one of respectful care. He and the general gently helped Arthur to his feet. A wheelchair was brought over, but Arthur waved it away with a stubborn pride that Jack instantly recognized and respected. "I can stand," Arthur insisted, though he leaned heavily on Jack's arm. The pharmacy line had dissolved, the staff now hovering, eager to assist. The head pharmacist, a woman who had been all business moments before, now looked at Arthur with wide, compassionate eyes. "Sir, whatever you need." "Right away." "His prescription," Jack said, handing her the empty bottle he'd picked up from the floor. He then handed her the rest of the scattered papers, except for one. He discreetly folded the eviction notice and slipped it into his own pocket. It was a clue. It was the beginning of a trail. As the pharmacist rushed to fill the prescription, General Thorne turned to Jack. "Cutter, my office told me you'd be here. I didn't expect you to be in the middle of a field op." "Just keeping my skills sharp, General," Jack replied dryly. "Good to see you're still looking out for our own," the general said, clapping a hand on Jack's massive shoulder. "This man," he said, nodding to Arthur, "is a national treasure. Make sure he's taken care of. Whatever he needs, you bill it to my office. Understand?" "Crystal, General," Jack said. It was an order he was more than willing to follow. With the prescriptions filled and a small crowd of admirers now surrounding Arthur, Jack knew he had to get him off the X. The VA was a compromised location, too much noise, too many variables. He needed a controlled environment to assess the real situation. "Arthur," he said, using the old Marine's first name for the first time. "I'm going to give you a ride home." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Arthur, overwhelmed by the sudden attention and the potent mix of pain, pride, and confusion, just nodded. The world had become too much, too fast. But in the middle of the chaos, this giant of a man and his watchful dog felt like a solid, unshakable rock. He trusted him. It was a gut feeling, the same instinct that had kept him alive on a dozen frozen hillsides. Jack led him out of the VA, Havoc walking point, a silent, furry vanguard clearing a path through the lingering onlookers. The cold air hit them again, but this time, it felt different to Arthur. It felt cleaner. The tight band of fear and shame around his chest had loosened, just a little. They reached Jack's vehicle. It was not a car. It was a matte black, heavily modified Ford F-250, a beast of a truck that looked like it belonged to a Tier 1 asset on a mission. It sat on oversized tires, its suspension lifted, its windows tinted dark. It radiated an aura of quiet, brutal capability. Jack opened the passenger door for Arthur, helping him up into the high cabin with a steady hand. Havoc leaped into the back seat, settling onto a custom-made platform, his eyes still scanning their surroundings. As Jack got into the driver's seat, the sheer size of him filling the space, Arthur finally found his voice. I don't know how to thank you, son." "No thanks necessary," Jack said, his eyes on the rearview mirror, watching the VA entrance recede. "We take care of our own." He pulled out onto the road, the powerful diesel engine a low, comforting rumble. He drove with an unnerving calm, his hands resting lightly on the wheel, his head on a constant, slow swivel. He was driving through suburban Denver, but he was piloting a convoy through hostile territory. "Where to, Arthur?" Arthur gave him the address, a little ashamed of the neighborhood he was sending them to. It was a part of the city that had been left behind, a collection of rundown apartment buildings and boarded-up storefronts. Jack didn't react. He just punched the address into the GPS, his face a granite mask. The silence in the truck was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two men who understood that words were often unnecessary. After a few minutes, Arthur spoke again, his voice hesitant. "That patch. VMO-6. It's been a long time since anyone knew what that meant." "Some things shouldn't be forgotten," Jack said, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. The unspoken truth hung between them. Jack hadn't recognized the patch either. Not at first. But he recognized the man. He recognized the look of a warrior who had been left behind, and that was a language Jack understood perfectly. He glanced down at his own pocket, feeling the crisp edge of the folded paper. The eviction notice. The salute in the VA had given Arthur back his dignity for a moment. But dignity didn't pay the rent. It didn't put food on the table. It didn't fight the jackals who preyed on the old and the weak. That, Jack thought, was a job for a different kind of soldier. The ride to Arthur's apartment was a journey from one America to another. They left the polished glass and steel of the medical campus and drove toward the city's decaying heart. The streets grew rougher, the buildings more neglected. Hope seemed to leach from the very color of the sky, turning it a uniform, dispiriting gray. Arthur was silent for most of the ride, staring out the window at a city he no longer recognized. He was lost in his own memories, the sudden, jarring recognition at the VA having unlocked doors in his mind that had been sealed for decades. He remembered the faces of the men he served with, young and invincible, now all ghosts. He remembered the weight of their trust, the shared burden of survival. And he felt a profound, aching sorrow for the man he had become, a man who had to be rescued from the floor of a public building. Jack let the silence sit. He knew what a mind under duress looked like. He knew the value of letting a man process his own battles. Instead, he observed. He watched the mirrors. A blue sedan had been 2 cars behind them since they left the VA. It was probably nothing. A coincidence. But in Jack's world, there were no coincidences. He made a mental note of the license plate. They arrived at Arthur's building. It was a 3-story brick tenement that looked like it was slowly surrendering to gravity. The windows were grimy, some cracked, one boarded over with plywood. The front stoop was crumbling. A group of young men loitered near the entrance, their eyes hard and empty, watching the massive black truck with a mixture of suspicion and avarice. Jack pulled to the curb, but did not turn off the engine. The low thrum of the diesel was a warning. He turned to Arthur. "Stay here." It was a command, delivered in the clipped, authoritative tone of a squad leader. Arthur, conditioned by a lifetime of following such commands, simply nodded. Jack got out of the truck, and the atmosphere on the street changed. The loiterers, who had been posturing and loud, suddenly fell silent. They saw the sheer size of him, the way he moved with an economy of motion that spoke of contained power. They saw the cold, appraising look in his eyes as he swept the area. They saw the massive dog in the back of the truck, its head now raised, its gaze fixed on them. They instinctively recognized a predator, a creature from a different, more dangerous ecosystem. They shuffled their feet, mumbled to each other, and melted away into the alleyways. The threat, minor as it was, had been neutralized. Jack opened Arthur's door and helped him down. As they walked toward the entrance, Jack's senses were on high alert. The smell of garbage and urine. The sound of a baby crying from an open window. The sight of a flickering fluorescent light in the hallway. It was a place of managed decay, of quiet desperation. Arthur's apartment was on the 2nd floor. As he fumbled with his keys, his hands still trembling, Jack placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Allow me." He took the key and opened the door. The apartment was exactly as Jack had pictured it, only smaller, colder. The bleakness of it hit him like a physical blow. This was how a nation treated a hero? In a cold, 10 by 12 box with a single photo for warmth. "It's not much," Arthur said, his voice laced with the shame he felt. "But it's been home." Jack stepped inside, his large frame seeming to shrink the room even further. Havoc, who had followed him up the stairs, stayed at the threshold, as if sensing the sanctity of this small, sad space. He whined softly. "I'll make some tea," Arthur offered, shuffling toward a tiny kitchenette that was little more than a hot plate and a stained sink. "That's okay, Arthur," Jack said gently. "Let's just sit for a minute." He guided the old man to the lumpy armchair. Arthur sank into it with a grateful sigh. The sudden rush of adrenaline from the VA, followed by the journey home, had left him completely drained. Jack stood in the center of the room, his mind working like a battlefield computer. He was assessing the situation, gathering intelligence. He saw the empty cupboard when Arthur had reached for a mug. He saw the thin blanket on the bed. He saw the pile of medical bills on the small table, held down by a tarnished medal. And he remembered the piece of paper in his pocket. He pulled it out, the crisp white of the eviction notice a stark contrast to the faded yellow of Arthur's life. He unfolded it. "Arthur," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "What is this?" Arthur looked at the paper in Jack's hand and a deep, weary sigh escaped his lips. The last of his pride crumbled. That's from Mr. Thorne." "Thorne?" Jack's voice sharpened. The name of the general from the VA, Thorne, echoed in his mind, a bizarre and cruel coincidence. This Thorne, however, was clearly of a different breed. "Martin Thorne," Arthur clarified. "Thorne Financial Solutions. He's a financial advisor. A friend from the VFW Post recommended him a few years back, after Ellie passed. Said he helps veterans. He helped me set up a reverse mortgage. Said it would give me enough money to live on, let me stay in my home." Jack's blood began to run cold. He knew about these schemes. Predatory, parasitic operations that targeted the elderly and the vulnerable. "Let me guess," Jack said, his voice hardening. "The payments were good for a while. And then the fees started. Adjustment fees. Service charges. Late penalties on payments you never knew you missed." Arthur looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "How did you know?" "It's a standard play," Jack said, the anger in his voice a low, controlled burn. "They drain the equity, bury you in debt, and then when the numbers look right for them, they foreclose. They take the house. All of it." "He said it was just business," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. "He said the market changed. He was so polite about it. Even sent me a fruit basket at Christmas." The righteous fury that Jack kept chained deep inside him began to strain against its leash. A fruit basket. The sheer, condescending arrogance of it. This man, this Martin Thorne, was not just a predator. He was a monster who smiled while he devoured his victims. "Arthur, I need you to be straight with me," Jack said, kneeling in front of the old Marine, bringing himself to eye level. "How many others?" "At the VFW Post." "Did he help anyone else?" Arthur's face clouded with a new, dawning horror. He hadn't thought beyond his own predicament. I don't know. A few of the guys mentioned him. Frank Miller. He lost his house last year. They said it was the bank. An old Sergeant Davis. He had to move in with his daughter. He was so ashamed. He just stopped coming to the meetings. That was it. The horrifying revelation. This wasn't a one-off case of a single veteran being cheated. This was a systematic operation. A hunting ground. And Martin Thorne was the apex predator. Jack stood up, a decision made. The mission parameters had been established. The enemy had been identified. He pulled out his satellite phone. There was only one number he needed. He walked to the window, turning his back to Arthur to give him a semblance of privacy. He pressed the speed dial. It rang once. "Talk to me," a voice crackled on the other end. It was young, sharp, and laced with a caffeine-fueled energy. "Spectre," Jack said. "It's Cutter. I have a situation." "Cutter? My man. Thought you were off wrestling bears and becoming one with nature," the voice replied. "What's the emergency? Did you run out of pine cones?" "I'm sending you a name," Jack said, ignoring the banter. "Martin Thorne. Thorne Financial Solutions. Based in Denver. I need everything you can find. I want his life on a platter. Bank accounts, shell corporations, business partners, ex-wives, what he eats for breakfast. Everything. I want to know where he sleeps." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The playful tone in Spectre's voice vanished, replaced by a cold professionalism. Spectre, real name Kevin, had been a communications sergeant in Jack's unit. He'd lost both his legs to an IED, the same type of device Havoc had been trained to find. Now, from a basement in San Diego surrounded by a fortress of servers and monitors, he waged his own war in the digital realm. He was Jack's Overwatch, his intelligence network. Is this business, or is it personal, Jack? Spectre asked quietly. Jack looked over his shoulder at Arthur, who had fallen into a fitful, exhausted sleep in his chair, the picture of his late wife still clutched in his hand. He looked at the eviction notice. He thought of Frank Miller, who had lost his home, and Sergeant Davis, who had lost his pride. It's personal, Jack said, his voice like chipping flint. He's hunting our people. That was all Spectre needed to hear. The sound of furious typing erupted from the other end of the phone, a sound Jack knew well. It was the sound of a digital armory being unlocked. Give me 30 minutes, Spectre said. I'll peel him like an onion. Jack hung up. 30 minutes. An eternity. He paced the small room like a caged tiger, the fury building inside him a physical force. He had seen evil in many forms. The fanatical zealot with a bomb vest. The drug lord who butchered villages. But this was different. This was a quiet, civilized evil that wore a suit and a smile. It was a parasite that fed on honor and memory, that turned a man's service and sacrifice into a financial instrument to be leveraged and discarded. It was, to Jack, the most despicable evil of all. He looked at Arthur, sleeping the sleep of the utterly defeated. The general's salute had been a beautiful, fleeting moment. But it was just that, a moment. It couldn't fix this. It couldn't fight this kind of enemy. But Jack could. This was a language he understood. This was a war he was built to fight. He went to the door and spoke a single, soft command to the watchful dog in the hallway. Havoc. Watch. The big shepherd stepped silently into the room and lay down in front of the door, his body blocking the exit, his eyes fixed on the sleeping form of Arthur Jensen. He was on guard. The package was secure. Jack went back to the window and stared out at the grey, dying light of the afternoon. He was no longer just Jack Cutter, the broken recluse. He was Reckon. And the hunt was on. The 30-minute Spectre had requested stretched into 45. Jack knew this was a good sign. A simple background check was quick. A deep dive, a full-scale digital assault that involved bypassing firewalls, cracking encrypted servers, and navigating the dark web of shell corporations and offshore accounts, took time. Spectre was not just peeling the onion, he was grinding it into dust. While he waited, Jack performed a quiet reconnaissance of Arthur's life. He opened the refrigerator. It held a half-empty carton of milk, a single, shriveled apple, and a jar of mustard. Nothing else. The poverty was not just emotional, it was absolute. He checked the date on the milk. It was a week past its prime. The anger in him, a cold, precise instrument, sharpened its edge. He moved back to the main room, his movement silent, respectful of the sleeping man in the chair. He looked at the medals on the table. He picked up the Silver Star. It felt heavier than its weight in metal. He read the citation, which was tucked beneath it. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action, the words were formal, sterile. They couldn't possibly capture the reality of what Arthur had done. They couldn't describe the terror, the cold, the screams of the wounded, the deafening roar of incoming fire. Jack put the medal down gently, as if it were a sacred object. In his world, it was. His phone vibrated. A text from Spectre. Incoming. Secure line. Jack answered. Report. Jack. You're not going to believe the scale of this. Spectre's voice was grim, all traces of his earlier humor gone. This Martin Thorne isn't a loan shark. He's a goddamn Bond villain. Give me the top line, Jack commanded, his focus narrowing to a pinpoint. Okay, top line, Thorne Financial Solutions is a front. The real business is a private equity fund called Patriot Capital. The name is a sick joke. He exclusively targets veterans, specifically those with VA benefits and property. He uses a network of finders, guys he pays off at VFW posts, American Legions, even a couple of crooked clerks at the VA, to identify vulnerable targets. Jack's knuckles turned white as he gripped the phone. A network. A conspiracy. It's a multi-stage process, Spectre continued, the sound of his keyboard a frantic underscore to his words. Stage 1, he offers them financial planning for these predatory reverse mortgages, like with your guy, Arthur. He uses complex, jargon-filled documents they can't possibly understand. He bleeds them dry with fees until they default. Stage 2, he forecloses, buying the property for pennies on the dollar through one of a dozen shell corporations. I'm tracking LLCs registered in Delaware, Nevada, the Cayman Islands. This guy is sophisticated. What does he do with the properties? Jack asked, his voice dangerously quiet. That's the sickest part, Spectre said, his voice dropping. He doesn't just flip them. He's a collector. I've hacked into his personal server. He has a database. He calls it the Revealer Collection. He's not just taking their houses, Jack. He's taking their history. He's going after properties owned by decorated veterans. The more distinguished the service, the more he wants the property. He has a rating system. A Medal of Honor recipient's home is a 5-star acquisition. A Silver Star, like Arthur's, is a 4-star. Jack felt a wave of nausea. This was beyond greed. This was a perversion, a fetish. Thorne wasn't just stealing money, he was consuming their honor, collecting their lives like trophies. It gets worse, Spectre said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm in his encrypted files now. He has a deacquisition protocol. For targets who fight back, who hire lawyers, who cause problems. Define deacquisition, Jack demanded, though he already knew the answer. It means making them go away. I've found 3 cases, Jack. 3 veterans who were fighting foreclosure proceedings against Thorne. All died in the last 2 years. One from a home invasion gone wrong. Another from a hit and run. A third from a sudden, unexplained heart attack, despite a clean bill of health. The police reports are all closed. Unsolved. Insufficient evidence. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. This wasn't just financial fraud. This was murder. This bastard isn't just a predator, Jack murmured. He's a serial killer in a suit. You have no idea, Spectre said. The total value of the assets he's stolen is north of $50 million. I've got a list of over 200 victims, Jack. 200 of our guys, stripped of everything they had. Some are on the street. Some are dead. And your man Arthur. He was next on the list. His eviction was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. The timeline was collapsing. The threat was imminent. Where is he? Jack asked. The question was not a request. It was a promise. His office is the top floor of the Thorne Tower downtown. State-of-the-art security, biometric locks, the works. But he's not there now. He's at his home. A secluded estate in the foothills. Gated community, private security patrol. I'm sending you the address and the schematics now. Jack. This place is a fortress. No fortress is perfect, Jack said, his mind already shifting from investigation to infiltration. He was running tactical scenarios, planning entry points, mapping out the opposition. Jack, listen to me, Spectre's voice was urgent. This is beyond you going in and breaking a guy's nose. This is FBI, RICO level stuff. I've got enough here to put this guy away for 1,000 years. Let me make the call. Let the feds handle it. Negative, Spectre, Jack said, his decision absolute. The feds will spend a year building a case. They'll offer him a deal. He'll lawyer up, hide his money, and serve 5 years in a country club prison. That's not justice. That's a business expense. He looked at Arthur, so fragile, so broken. He thought of the 200 other victims. He thought of the 3 dead men. This requires a personal touch, Jack continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. This requires a reckoning. I'm not going to arrest him. I'm going to dismantle him. I'm going to strip him of every asset, every dollar, and every shred of his power. And I'm going to give it all back. Jack, That's insane, Spectre protested. You can't just. I need 2 things from you, Jack interrupted, his mind already on the next phase of the operation. First, I need a real-time feed of his security system. Cameras, motion sensors, everything. Patch it through to my tablet. Second, I need you to be ready to move a lot of money, very quickly. I'm going to get you his account numbers, his passwords, everything. And you are going to drain him dry. You're going to send every penny back to the people he stole it from, with interest. Can you do that? There was a long pause. Jack could hear the hum of Spectre's servers, the distant sound of a man wrestling with his conscience versus his loyalty. It's highly illegal, 12 felonies at least, Spectre finally said. Then, a sigh. Yeah. I can do that. It'll be the most beautiful piece of code I've ever written. Good, Jack said. Stay on the line. I'm going mobile. He hung up. The righteous fury had now cooled into a diamond-hard, laser-focused purpose. He was no longer a man. He was a weapon. And he had just been aimed. He walked over to the sleeping Arthur and gently shook his shoulder. The old Marine's eyes fluttered open. What? What is it? Arthur mumbled, disoriented. Arthur, I have to leave for a while, Jack said, his voice soft but firm. I have some business to attend to. My dog, Havoc, will stay with you. He will not let anyone in this door that isn't me. You'll be safe. Arthur looked at the massive dog, who sat up, his ears alert, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand every word. He looked back at Jack, at the terrifying resolve in the younger man's face. What? What are you going to do? Arthur asked. Jack placed a hand on the old Marine's shoulder. The same hand that had held a rifle, that had ended lives, now offered a simple, profound comfort. What we should have done a long time ago, Jack said. I'm going hunting. He turned and walked out the door, closing it softly behind him. The click of the lock echoed in the hallway. Inside, Havoc lay down in front of the door, a 95-pound security system, a loyal sentinel standing guard over a forgotten hero. Outside, Jack Cutter descended the stairs, his face a mask of cold fury. The sun had set, and the city lights were beginning to glitter. To most, they were beautiful. To Jack, they were just tactical points in a dark and hostile landscape. He got into his truck, the engine turning over with a predatory growl. He was heading for the foothills. He was heading for Martin Thorne. Justice was coming. And it was not going to knock. The drive to the foothills was a calculated transition from one state of being to another. Jack Cutter, the man, receded. The operator, the Tier 1 asset, came to the forefront. His breathing slowed, his heart rate dropped. The world outside the truck's cabin became a stream of data to be processed, traffic patterns, potential surveillance points, escape routes. On the passenger seat, a ruggedized tablet flickered to life. Spectre's work. A schematic of the Thorne estate appeared, overlaid with blue dots indicating security cameras and red lines for motion sensor zones. I'm in, Spectre's voice crackled through the truck's speakers via the synced phone. He's got a commercial-grade system, but the installer used a default admin password. Amateur hour. I have full control. I can loop the cameras, disable the sensors. Just tell me when and where. Stand by, Jack commanded. Give me a sit rep on the target. Thorne is home. His phone's GPS places him in the main house. He's alone. No wife, no kids. Just a housekeeper who leaves at 5 p.m. He has a private security patrol, Eagle Eye Security. They make one pass every hour, on the hour. Next pass is in 20 minutes. They're lazy, Jack. They just drive the perimeter. They won't leave their vehicle. Understood. Jack left the main highway and turned onto a winding private road. The houses grew larger, more ostentatious, set far back from the road behind imposing gates. This was a world of wealth so vast it had to be insulated from the reality the rest of the world inhabited. He found a service road a quarter-mile from the Thorne Estate's main gate and pulled the truck into a thicket of pine trees, killing the engine and the lights. The sudden silence was absolute. He got out and went to the back of the truck, opening a concealed, heavy-duty Pelican case bolted to the floor. It was not a case of guns. Jack didn't need them for this. This was not an assassination. It was a dismantling. The case held his non-lethal toolkit. A set of graphite lockpicks. A slim, high-tensile pry bar. A pair of night vision goggles. A roll of zip ties. And a small, custom-made device that looked like a USB stick. He dressed in black, the color of the night. Black cargo pants, a black thermal shirt, a black balaclava that he kept rolled up like a beanie for now. He slipped the tools into the various pockets and harnesses of his tactical vest. He was a dark Spectre preparing for his haunt. "Spectre, you see the west wall?" Jack whispered into his throat. "MIC. The side facing the ravine." "Yeah, I see it. It's a blind spot. A 10-foot stone wall, topped with decorative iron spikes, but no cameras and no sensors on that stretch." He probably figured the terrain was security enough. "Amateurs always do," Jack murmured. "Kill the power to the gate's electronic lock in 60 seconds. I'm moving." He moved through the woods with an unnatural silence, his boots making no sound on the pine needles. He was a shadow flowing through other shadows. He reached the perimeter wall, a monument to Thorne's paranoia and arrogance. 10 feet of solid stone. To a normal person, it was impassable. To Jack, it was a minor obstacle. He found handholds in the rough-hewn stone, his powerful fingers gripping the small imperfections. He began to climb, his movements fluid, efficient, a vertical dance of muscle and balance. He reached the top, carefully avoiding the decorative spikes, and swung his body over, landing on the other side in a soft crouch, the impact absorbed by his powerful legs. He was inside. The grounds were immaculate, a carpet of perfectly manicured grass stretching toward a house that was less a home and more a monument to glass, steel, and ego. It was a cold, sterile place, a rich man's idea of what a house should look like. "I'm in," Jack whispered. "Target is in the house." "Affirmative," Spectre replied. "I'm tracking his phone. He's in a room on the second floor, southeast corner. Looks like a study." "And Jack, get this. The room is lead-lined." Jack paused. "A panic room." "More than that. It's a vault. Scanned documents show he uses it to store his most sensitive acquisitions. Not just digital files. Hard copies. Deeds, titles. And personal effects. Trophies," Jack breathed, the disgust a bitter taste in his mouth. "Exactly. Jack, the door to that room is a 6-inch thick titanium vault door. You're not getting through that without C4-inch. "I won't have to," Jack said, his eyes scanning the house's exterior. "He's going to open it for me." He moved across the lawn, a ghost in the moonlight, sticking to the shadows cast by imported, strategically lit trees. He reached the house, a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass windows. He could see inside, into a cavernous living room decorated with minimalist furniture and soulless modern art. It was a magazine spread, not a home. Spectre looped the cameras covering the patio and the living room. "Give me 5 minutes." "Looping now." "You're dark." Jack approached a sliding glass door. It was locked, of course. He pulled out the slim pry bar. He inserted the tip into the tiny gap between the door and the frame and applied steady, controlled pressure. There was a soft pop as the lock mechanism disengaged. It was an old trick, one that worked on even the most expensive doors. He slid the door open just enough to slip through and closed it behind him. He was inside the belly of the beast. The air was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaning products. He moved through the downstairs rooms, his senses taking in everything. The kitchen was a gleaming, untouched expanse of stainless steel. The dining room table could seat 20, but was covered in a thin layer of dust. This was a house for showing off, not for living in. He found the stairs and ascended, his feet silent on the floating metal steps. He followed Spectre's directions, down a hallway lined with more abstract art. He reached the southeast corner. There were two doors. One was a normal wooden door. The other was a massive, seamless slab of brushed metal, with no handle, only a biometric hand scanner and a keypad set into the wall beside it. The vault. He's still in there, Spectre confirmed. Phone hasn't moved. Jack approached the normal wooden door, which led to what appeared to be an attached master bedroom. He didn't knock. He turned the handle. It was unlocked. He pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty, dominated by a massive bed that looked like it had never been slept in. He had his target cornered. Thorn was in his hole, his fortress within a fortress. Now, all Jack had to do was flush him out. He walked back into the hallway and stood before the vault door. He looked up at the ceiling, spotting a smoke detector. A plan formed, simple and brutal. "Spectre," he whispered. "The man's a collector. What does a collector fear more than anything?" "Loss of the collection," Spectre answered immediately. "Exactly. Can you trigger the fire alarm system?" "Not the whole house. Just this wing. I want the sprinklers going off everywhere except inside that room." "Child's play," Spectre said. A few seconds of silence, then, "Get ready." Triggering in 3, 2, 1 inch. A piercing, high-pitched alarm began to shriek. Red lights flashed in the hallway. A moment later, the sprinklers kicked in, showering the hallway and the master bedroom in a downpour of cold, chemical-treated water. Jack stepped back, positioning himself in the shadows of the bedroom doorway, just out of sight of the vault. He was perfectly still, a patient predator waiting for the prey to bolt from its den. Inside the vault, Martin Thorn heard the alarm. He was sitting at a large mahogany desk, admiring his latest acquisition, a set of dog tags belonging to a deceased Vietnam veteran whose family he had just swindled out of their farm. He felt a surge of annoyance. Another false alarm. The system had been acting up all week. He checked the internal security monitor. He saw the flashing lights, the water pouring from the ceiling. This was not a false alarm. A primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced his bubble of arrogant calm. Fire. Water. His collection. The papers, the deeds, the irreplaceable trophies of his conquests. They were all stored in climate-controlled, fireproof safes, but the thought of any damage, any risk, sent a jolt of panic through him. He had to check. He had to secure them. He stood up, his heart hammering in his chest. He ran to the vault door, placed his hand on the scanner, and quickly typed in the code. With a heavy, pneumatic hiss, the 6-inch slab of titanium began to slide open. Martin Thorn stepped out of his sanctuary, his eyes wide with fear, directly into Jack Cutter's trap. The moment the vault door was open wide enough for a man to pass through, Jack moved. He burst from the shadows of the bedroom, a massive, dark shape emerging from the artificial rain of the sprinklers. Thorn didn't even have time to scream. One moment he was staring in horror at the water damage to his expensive hardwood floors, the next, a hand the size of a catcher's mitt clamped over his mouth, and an arm like a steel python wrapped around his chest, lifting him off his feet. Jack dragged the kicking, struggling man back into the vault, swinging him around and slamming him against the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of Thorn, and his struggles turned into weak, pathetic gasps. Jack's hand was a steel vice over his mouth, cutting off any sound. The alarm, Jack growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble next to Thorn's ear. "Turn it off. Now." He released the pressure on Thorn's arm just enough for him to reach the control panel inside the vault. Thorn, his eyes wide with terror, his body trembling uncontrollably, fumbled with the controls. He was a man who had orchestrated the ruin of hundreds, who had likely ordered the deaths of 3 men, but faced with actual, physical violence, his entire being collapsed into a puddle of sniveling cowardice. The alarm stopped. The sprinklers sputtered and died. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of Thorn's ragged, terrified breathing and the steady drip of water in the hallway. Jack spun Thorn around to face him. He still had one hand clamped over Thorne's mouth, the other gripping the front of his expensive silk shirt. He let Thorne get a good look at him for the first time. The black balaclava was now pulled down, covering all but his eyes. And those eyes, cold and merciless as a winter sea, bored into Thorne's soul. "Who the hell are you?" Thorne managed to choke out, his voice a squeak. "The police are on their way." "No, they're not," Jack said calmly. "There is no alarm. There is no one coming to save you. There is just you, me, and a reckoning." He shoved Thorne backward, sending him stumbling over an ottoman and crashing onto a plush leather sofa. Thorne scrambled backward, trying to put distance between himself and this terrifying apparition. "Take whatever you want," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "There's cash in the safe. Jewelry. Just take it and go." Jack ignored him. He walked slowly around the room, his eyes taking in the grotesque collection. It was worse than he had imagined. Display cases held folded flags. Shadow boxes contained medals and ribbons, stripped from the uniforms of the men he had destroyed. And on the walls, framed like works of art, were the deeds to their homes, their farms, their legacies. He saw a frame containing a deed to a small farm in Iowa, and next to it, a tarnished bronze star. He saw another with the title to a modest house in a working-class neighborhood, displayed alongside a Purple Heart. It was a gallery of stolen honor. His eyes finally landed on a file folder sitting on Thorne's desk. The name on the tab was Jensen, Arthur. Jack picked it up. He opened it. Inside was a copy of Arthur's service record, a photo of his small apartment building, and a financial summary showing the complete erosion of his home's equity. Tucked in the back was a small, plastic baggie containing a faded, worn patch. A griffin with its wings spread. Thorne had been planning to cut it from Arthur's jacket after he was evicted. A trophy. The cold, controlled anger inside Jack erupted into a white-hot, righteous fury. He turned to face Thorne, the file held in his hand. "Arthur Jensen," Jack said, his voice dangerously soft. "A ghost griffin. A hero of 2 wars. To you, he was just another acquisition. Another trophy for your sick collection." Thorne's eyes widened in dawning comprehension. "The old man. From the VA? This is about him? He's a nobody. A piece of collateral." The words were a death sentence. Jack crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't hit Thorne. That would have been too easy, too quick. Instead, he grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and lifted him to his feet, slamming him back against the wall. He held the open file in front of Thorne's face. This nobody held a hill for 3 days, wounded and alone, to save an entire company of Marines, Jack snarled, his face inches from Thorne's. "He has more honor in his little finger than you have in your entire parasitic existence. You don't just steal their money. You steal their stories. You steal their lives. And you display them on your walls like you earned them." He threw Thorne back onto the sofa. "The collection is over. The museum is closed." Jack went to Thorne's desk. The large, expensive computer monitor was still on, displaying Thorne's portfolio of stolen assets. Jack pulled the small, custom USB device from his vest. "Spectre," he said into his mic, "you ready?" "Ready and waiting, my man," Spectre's voice replied, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "Let's burn this mother down." Jack plugged the USB into the computer. "It's a direct physical access key," Jack explained to the terrified Thorne, who was watching as if in a trance. "My associate on the other end now has total control of your entire digital empire. Every account. Every server. Every file." On the screen, windows began to open and close with lightning speed. Lines of code scrolled past. It was a digital exorcism. What are you doing?" Thorne stammered. "We're making some adjustments to your portfolio," Jack said coldly. "We're initiating a transfer. A large 1-inch. He turned to Thorne, his eyes like chips of flint. "Give me the passwords. The verbal authentications. The security questions. everything. Now. Or I will break you. Not your nose. Not your arm. I will sit here and I will break every single bone in your body, one by one, starting with your toes. And I will take my time. It was not a bluff. Thorne saw the absolute, unshakable conviction in Jack's eyes. He saw a man who had been to the darkest places on Earth and had come back with nothing left to lose. And in that moment, Martin Thorne, the master of the universe, the corporate predator, broke completely. He began to sob, great, cracking, pathetic sobs. And between them, he started to talk. He gave Jack everything. Passwords, account numbers, the names of his offshore bankers, the answers to security questions so personal they made him blush. He sang like a canary in a hurricane. For the next hour, Jack Cutter conducted the most hostile takeover in history. With Jack providing the keys, Spectre, the ghost in the machine, worked his dark magic. They were a two-man wrecking crew, a perfect fusion of physical intimidation and digital warfare. First, we're returning the principal, Jack narrated, forcing Thorne to watch the screen as millions of dollars began to flow out of his accounts. Every cent you stole from every victim on your list. I see you kept meticulous records. That's helpful. Spectre had created a script. It was identifying each victim in Thorne's database, calculating the total amount stolen, and initiating a wire transfer back to their last known bank account. Names scrolled down the screen: Miller, Davis, Rodriguez, Smith. 200 names. 200 lives. Now, for the punitive damages, Jack continued, his voice devoid of emotion. Spectre, apply the multiplier. Applying the asshole tax now, Spectre's voice crackled. The numbers on the screen began to climb exponentially. Each victim was not just being refunded, they were being given a second transfer, a sum 5 times the amount that had been stolen from them. It was a life-altering amount of money for most of them. Enough to buy back their homes, pay off their debts, and live with dignity. Thorne watched, his face a mask of disbelief and horror, as his empire, built over decades of calculated cruelty, was dismantled in minutes. His net worth, once in the 9 figures, was plummeting toward zero. But that's my money, he finally whimpered. It never was, Jack said, not even looking at him. Next, the properties. Spectre, you have the list of shell corporations. I've already seized control of them, Spectre replied. I'm generating quitclaim deeds for every property, transferring ownership from the LLCs directly back to the original owners or their next of kin. Filing them electronically with the county clerk's office as we speak. It'll be a legal mess for them to untangle, but by the time they do, the ownership will be ironclad. A printer on Thorne's desk, which had been silent, whirred to life. It began printing out the newly filed deeds, one by one. Now, for the evidence, Jack said. Spectre, package everything. The database, the deacquisition files, the offshore account records, the list of his finders. Encrypt it and send a copy to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, the SEC, and the IRS. Anonymously, of course. Already done, Spectre said. Merry Christmas, Quantico. The final phase was the physical destruction. Jack walked over to the wall of framed deeds and medals. He didn't smash them. That would be too chaotic. Instead, he began to take them down, one by one, with a calm, deliberate reverence. He stacked the frames on the floor. Then he went to the desk and picked up the small baggie containing Arthur's patch. He tucked it safely into his pocket. He turned to face Thorne, who was now a hollowed-out shell of a man, staring blankly at the computer screen, which now displayed a single, mocking image, a bank account with a balance of $000. It's over, Jack said. He walked to the vault door. He paused, then turned back. One more thing, he said. He picked up Thorne's phone from the desk. He found the contact for Eagle Eye Security and hit dial. This is Thorne, he said, his voice a perfect imitation of Thorne's earlier, arrogant tone. I'm terminating my contract, effective immediately. Your services are no longer required. He hung up before they could reply. He then wiped the phone clean and snapped it in half with his bare hands. He had stripped Thorne of his money, his property, his digital life, and his security. He was now just a man in a big, empty house, with a legion of federal investigators on their way. It was, as Jack had intended, a fate worse than death. He took one last look at the room, at the sobbing, broken man on the sofa. He felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction. Just the quiet, grim completion of a mission. "Spectre, I'm out." "Wipe the drives." "All of them." "With pleasure," Spectre said. Going dark. Jack stepped out of the vault, pulling the massive door closed behind him. It didn't lock. He had made sure of that. The feds would need to get in. He walked back through the house, the same way he had come in. The sprinklers had stopped, but the air was still thick with the smell of water and ozone. He slipped out the sliding glass door, climbed back over the wall, and disappeared into the night. The ghost had completed his haunt. The reckoning was over. The drive back to the city was a quiet, solemn affair. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving behind the familiar, hollow ache of a mission completed. The war was over, for now. Jack checked his tablet. Spectre had sent a final message. "Transfers complete. Total amount redistributed, $572 million. Empire decapitalized. Have a nice night." Jack allowed himself a small, grim smile. It was a good night's work. He didn't go back to his cabin. His place was not there anymore, not for tonight. His mission had a final phase, returning to the objective. He pulled up in front of Arthur's dilapidated apartment building just as the first hints of dawn were painting the eastern sky gray. The street was quiet, sleeping. He got out of the truck and went inside. He climbed the stairs to the second floor and stood before Arthur's door. He could hear the faint sound of a television inside. He knocked softly. "Who is it?" a voice called out, stronger and clearer than he had heard from Arthur before. "It's Jack Cutter," he replied. There was the sound of a chain being unfastened, of locks being turned. The door opened. Arthur stood there, dressed, his hair combed. And behind him, sitting alertly, was Havoc. The dog's tail gave a single, happy thump against the floor when he saw Jack. He had completed his watch. "You were gone a long time," Arthur said, his eyes searching Jack's face. "I had some things to take care of," Jack said simply. He stepped inside. The room was the same, but the atmosphere felt different. The oppressive cloud of despair had lifted, replaced by a nervous, hopeful energy. Arthur had been awake all night, Jack realized, waiting. Did you find him?" Arthur asked. "I found him," Jack said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small plastic baggie containing the ghost griffin patch. He handed it to Arthur. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. Arthur took the baggie, his hand trembling. He stared at the patch, and his eyes filled with tears. He took it. "He was collecting trophies," Jack said. "He won't be anymore." Jack sat down on the edge of the bed, the springs groaning in protest. He was bone-tired, the weight of the night's event settling on him. "Arthur, I need you to check your bank account," Jack said. Arthur looked confused. "My bank account? Son, there's nothing in there but dust and echoes." "Just check," Jack insisted gently. Wary, Arthur shuffled over to a small stack of papers and pulled out a bank statement. He found the number for telephone banking and dialed, his old rotary phone a relic from another era. He went through the automated prompts, his face a mask of skepticism. Then he went very still. "Please re-enter your security code," he mumbled, thinking it was a mistake. He did. He listened again. His hand holding the phone dropped to his side. He stared at Jack, his face pale, his mouth open. It says. "There's over $100,000 in my account," he said it like a man confessing to a hallucination. "It's your money, Arthur," Jack said. "Your principal, returned. With interest. And damages." "But how?" Let's just say Martin Thorne had a change of heart. He's decided to divest from his Uvela collection. In fact, he's liquidated his entire portfolio. A lot of your friends from the VFW are going to be waking up to some good news this morning. The old Marine sank into his armchair, the phone clattering to the floor. He stared into the middle distance, trying to process the impossible. He had gone from eviction and destitution to financial security in the space of a single night. It was too much to comprehend. What about him? Arthur finally asked, his voice a whisper. Thorne? He's going to be busy for a while, Jack said. He has a meeting with the FBI. And the IRS. And the SEC. He's going to be very popular. Silence fell between them, the comfortable silence of a shared victory. Havoc, sensing the mission was truly over, padded over and rested his massive head on Jack's knee, letting out a deep sigh of contentment. After a long time, Arthur stood up. He walked over to his worn field jacket, which was hanging on the back of a chair. He took the patch in its baggie, opened it, and held the small, faded piece of cloth in his palm. He looked from the patch to Jack, and then to Havoc. You know, he said, his voice thick with emotion, the Griffins. We weren't a squad. We were a brotherhood. We went out alone, but we were never really alone. We always knew the others had our back. I haven't felt that in a long time. He looked directly at Jack, his old eyes clear and bright. Until now. Jack just nodded, his own throat suddenly tight. What are you going to do now, Arthur? Jack asked, changing the subject. Arthur looked around the small, cold room that had been his prison for so long. The first thing I'm going to do, he said with a newfound resolve, is find a new place to live. Someplace with a yard. For a dog, he smiled at Havoc. And then, he continued, his voice growing stronger, I'm going to find Frank Miller. And Sergeant Davis. And all the others. Thorne may be gone, but the fight's not over. There are more of him out there. And there are more of us. Jack looked at him, and for the first time, he didn't see a victim. He saw a leader. The old Marine was back. We could start a foundation, Arthur said, the idea blooming in his mind. Use some of this money. A real one. Run by veterans, for veterans. To fight these predators. To help guys who fall through the cracks. We could call it the Griffin Fund. Jack felt a strange, unfamiliar feeling in his chest. It was not the cold weight of guilt or the hot fire of rage. It was something else. It was hope. He had come here on a mission to save one man, but he had ended up finding a new mission for himself. He had come to the city to honor a promise to a dead friend, to make sure the old-timers weren't forgotten. But he had found something more. A new brotherhood. A new purpose. The war against the ghosts inside him wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt like he had allies. 3 months later. The sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. The air was warm, filled with the scent of salt and blooming bougainvillea. On the porch of a modest but comfortable house in a quiet San Diego suburb, 3 figures sat watching the spectacle. One was Arthur Jensen. He looked 10 years younger. The lines of worry on his face had softened. He was wearing a new jacket, but the old, faded ghost Griffin patch was sewn proudly on the breast. He held a glass of iced tea, a look of deep, profound peace on his face. Next to him sat Jack Cutter. He was in a t-shirt and shorts, the hard, tactical lines of his body softened by the warm evening light. The haunted look in his eyes was still there, but it was distant now, like a storm cloud far out at sea. He was watching the waves, a small, genuine smile on his lips. At their feet, lying in a patch of warm sunlight, was Havoc. His scar was still visible, a permanent part of him, but his body was relaxed, his breathing deep and even. He was home. In the driveway sat a new van. On its side, in tasteful, professional lettering, was a logo, a griffin with its wings spread, protectively encircling a group of smaller figures. Underneath it were the words, the Griffin Veterans Advocacy Fund. No brother left behind. Arthur had been true to his word. With the help of Spectre's legal and financial wizardry, they had established the foundation. They had tracked down every victim of Thorn's scheme. Some, they had helped get back on their feet. Others, they had simply given the news that their finances were secure. They had already taken on 3 new cases, fighting shady contractors and predatory lenders. Arthur was the heart of the operation, his wisdom and experience a guiding light. Spectre was the brains, his digital prowess their secret weapon. And Jack? Jack was the shield. He was the one who went out and met the monsters, his mere presence often enough to make them back down. He was the protector, the avenger, the quiet, unstoppable force for good. "It's a beautiful sunset," Arthur said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yes, sir," Jack replied. "It is." "You know," Arthur said, turning to him. "Eleanor always loved the sunset. She said it was proof that every day, no matter how dark, could have a beautiful ending." Jack didn't reply. He just watched the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon, and felt the cold, heavy weight in his chest feel just a little bit lighter. The ghosts were still there, but their voices were quieter now. They were being drowned out by the sound of the ocean, by the gentle murmur of a new brotherhood, by the steady, rhythmic breathing of a loyal friend sleeping at his feet. The war was not over. For men like him, it would never truly be over. But he had found a new battlefield. And for the first time in a very long time, he had found a measure of peace. He had found a new home. And he was not alone.